topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the hosts and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Welcome to Leadership for Life with Gina Gardner on W4CY Radio and Talk4 TV. Join your host, who is a multiple #1 international best-selling author, motivational speaker, empowerment and transformational leadership coach and trainer. She's the founder of Genuinely Hyphen You and has 30 years experience of helping people step into their genuine, authentic power. And now, here is Gina Gardner, your host of Leadership for Life.
Hello there, and welcome to the show today. Have we got a great show for you? My guest, Elizabeth Haywood, has written the most amazing novel, and it's one of those things that I have huge admiration. I've written many books, but I haven't written anything that requires me to use my imagination. All of my books are sharing expertise and experience, so I think that they are a very different animal. At the heart of today's show is all about resilience. It's about the capacity, no matter what happens in your life, for you to get up again, to become the leader of your own life. If you think about it, it's the main theme of this show. What struck me when I read Elizabeth's book, and it's a really great read, is although the book is set many years ago, how many of the themes resonate today. And in a little while, we're going to join with Elizabeth, and she's going to tell us about herself and about the book. But I want to spend this first few minutes of today's show thinking about resilience. We've been through the most challenging times in the last 15 months or so. And one of the things that I think has made the difference are those people who have the resilience to recognize that they will survive the challenge. Now, I recognize that many people have succumbed to this terrible virus, but I'm talking about the resilience to, when life is tough, to get up again. Those of you who know my story will know that I've had my own challenges, and I hope that I've demonstrated resilience in terms of getting on with things. But ultimately, it's not the challenge that defines you. You've heard that from me several times. It's what you do with it. And one of the things, there are many things about the book that were great, but one of the things that really struck me was that the heroine of the book, Lucy, is incredibly resilient in very difficult circumstances. So what is it that makes the difference between people who are resilient and people who see themselves as victim and become unable to help themselves because life is happening to them rather than life is happening for them? And so think about yourself. How often do you find yourself moaning and complaining and focusing on all the things that are going wrong? Or you use the challenge to develop and grow, and out of that challenge become an even better version of yourself. Now, let's be honest. When you are in the middle of the challenge, I am not suggesting that there aren't days when it's dark and difficult, nor am I suggesting that you should not ever complain. What I am saying is if you get stuck in that cycle of complaining and poor me, it doesn't do anything to help you manage the situation. We become slaves, if you like, to the voice that goes on in our head, to the identity that we give ourselves, whether we are the hero in our life story or whether we are the victim in our life story. And ultimately, that's your choice. Moment by moment, you are making choices, whether they're conscious or not. And those of you that are like the vast majority of the population who get stuck in that unconscious thinking can find it's all too easy to become the victim. Now, it requires courage to be resilient. You know, when life is really tough, being able to shake yourself off and get up and get going again really does take courage. Now, it's not the superhuman courage where you wear your red sparkly knickers over your trousers and so on, but it's that day-to-day small acts of courage where you get up in the morning, where you look for how you can make this day better. That courage for me is truly important in terms of becoming and sustaining being the leader in your own life. Think about the last few weeks. How often have you found yourself dipping below the line into that place where you think things are hopeless, where you're overwhelmed, where you feel that life is just too tricky? And think about what resources that you have available to you. Now, I use the analogy of small children when they're learning to walk, because for me, that resonates because I've learned to walk twice as an adult. When you watch a little child learning to walk, they demonstrate in a very practical way true resilience. Because when they fall over, and inevitably they do, they may cry for a minute or two, but they get up and they keep going and they keep going and they keep going until they crack it. And that's the same really for us all. We often don't know the answers, and it's only by trial and error that we find the way forward. But your mindset is so important. If you believe that you can't, then you won't. If you believe that you can, and you look for the opportunities and you try out different things, then the likelihood is that you will succeed. You're certainly far more likely to succeed than if you believe that you'll fail. And you're going to take different decisions. And those decisions are far more likely to be empowering. So we are going to, in a few minutes, join Elizabeth and talk about her book. But I want you to think about how often in the news these days we hear stories of slavery. There's been much, haven't there, with Black Lives Matter about slavery. And yet modern day slavery is alive and kicking. And I find it really sad that in the 21st century that many people are enslaved by people who believe that they have the right to hold them captive, to use their power in a way that I believe is inappropriate and should not be happening. But I think we can also become a slave to our own thinking, to our own limiting beliefs. They can keep us just as confined, just as much a capital, with very difficult outcomes to it. Now, I don't want to make light of slavery. It is the most pernicious thing. And there are many people who are still bearing the brunt of a societal way of being. And we'll hear much about that in the book. But I want you to also think about the role of women and how many women feel constrained by the way in which society treats them. Now, I've worked with many corporate women, business women, and they talk about the glass ceiling. And in my experience, it's often a ceiling that they have, if not created, and some of them have, they've perpetuated it because they have believed in the glass ceiling, and that in itself has kept them playing small. I think it's time to break the shackles of your limited thinking, your limited beliefs. It is time to step up and to be confident about who you are and your capacity to manage no matter what the situation is. You know, it's sensible if you're struggling to ask for help, but there's a difference between asking for help in the light of being a victim, poor me, you need to do it for me, and asking for help to help you step into your genuine power so you can do it for yourself. So after the break, we're going to be exploring Lucy, the ultimate survivor, and Elizabeth Haywood's story. So don't go away. I'll see you in a couple of moments.
You have been listening to Gina Gardner on Leadership for Life. We'll be back after this quick break. Want to get the best out of life personally and professionally? Are you ready to step into a life which excites and fulfills you? Well, the right place for you is Leadership for Life with Gina Gardner on W4CY Radio and Talk4 TV. We will share with you stories from inspiring people, a wide range of guest experts, and lots of practical strategies to help you get the very best out of your personal and professional life. Leadership for Life is a radio and TV show focused on helping you live a happier, more successful, and fulfilling life. Join international best-selling author, motivational speaker, empowerment and transformational leadership coach and trainer, Gina Gardner, live every Thursday, 1 p.m. Eastern Time on W4CY Radio and Talk4 TV. Become the leader of your own life. Gina Gardner's #1 international best-selling book, Thriving Not Surviving, The 5 Secret Pathways to Happiness, Success, and Fulfillment, provides you with the foundational principles on which to become the best leader of your own life. It's available as an ebook, paperback, hardback, and as an audio from genuinely-u.com, or also from Amazon. Every one of the principles have been proven to work for the countless people who have used them, including the author. Now, let's put them to work for you. If you're ready to discover your true leadership life design, accelerate your journey with an invitation to join Gina for Leadership for Life VIP Day. Choose your journey of self-discovery where Gina will help you navigate your way to happiness, success, and fulfillment. To find out more, email Gina at genuinely-u.com. Welcome back to Leadership for Life. Here is your host, Gina Gardner.
Hello there. I am so excited to be able to welcome Dr. Elizabeth Haywood. Let me read you her bio. Dr. Elizabeth Haywood has spent her career in business in the UK, Europe, and America. She's held a range of leadership roles in public, private, and third sectors. She lives with her husband, Lord Peter Hayne, mostly in South Wales. This is her first book, born out of a desire to tell her ancestors' extraordinary story, and extraordinary it is. So without more ado, let me welcome Elizabeth Haywood.
Hello,
Hi.
Gina.
Hi there. Thank you so much for joining me on the show. I have to say before we start, I couldn't put your book down. In fact, you owe me a night's sleep because I started the book early in the evening and I finally finished it at about 6:30 in the morning because it was such a good read and I can really recommend it to anybody. Before we get started on the book, I'd love to know your story, if you'd share that with our viewers and our listeners so they get to know you a bit before we start on the book.
Okay, well, thank you for inviting me on, Gina, and thank you for that plug and that compliment just now. That's absolutely lovely. I'm sorry you missed a night's sleep, though. I missed quite a few when I was writing Lucy, I can assure you. So where to start? Well, I was born in Scotland to a Royal Naval officer and a nurse. That's my father and my mother, hence in Scotland because my dad was based on the Clyde at the time. And then I was brought up mainly in the southwest and southeast of England, in Devon and Surrey. I didn't go to university after I left school. I decided to go to work. And that was when I went out and I worked for the European Parliament in Luxembourg and I worked in New York for trade journals. And eventually I decided that I wasn't going to get very far unless I went to university. So first one in my family to go. So I went to university.
Congratulations.
Chose Cardiff. I managed to squeak in just a year before my much younger brother, so that was quite good. I chose Cardiff for my first degree, and for my PhD, I went to, it was a sort of a joint thing between Paris and Swansea. And I stayed on in Wales afterwards to work there. And working first of all for the Welsh Development Agency, and then I headed up the CBI in Wales, the Confederation of British Industry, and then I moved to London for a bit and worked for some the train companies, the passenger train companies, as comms director. So it's been quite varied, and more recently I've picked up some of the threads of that. I headed my own headhunting company for a while, so I picked up the themes of recruitment and management due diligence, and also the theme of community communication and PR, and took those into some non-exec roles, which I've been on several boards, and I'm chairing one at the moment. Then we come to sort of actually writing the book, if you like, and that sort of came out of the blue, although the background to it has been there throughout since I was a tiny child, so throughout my life.
What was the spur? What was the thing, the pivotal moment that I've got to write this story, I've got to take this known background, and I've got to do something with it?
It was actually in 2007, which you may or may not remember, was the anniversary, the bicentenary of the abolition of the slave trade.
Yeah.
We got contacted by a museum that wanted to run an exhibition that year, and asked if we had any artifacts that they could borrow for the exhibition. And it was around, did we have anything that belonged to Sam Lord, so my great-great-great-grandfather, or indeed Lucy, his wife. And this was in South Wales. And that was the first time I realised that actually, and I was living in Wales at the time, and working. And that was the first time I realised that actually Lucy had returned to Wales, and that she hadn't spent all her life in Barbados. Don't know why I hadn't clocked it before, but I hadn't. So it started me looking through some of the papers that we had. And so sort of going through those and trying to decipher some of the handwritten documents that we had. And that really just, it seemed such an interesting story, but there were so many gaps, because my grandfather had many, many years ago, he'd gone out to Barbados on a banana boat, quite literally.
Right.
Because there were two things that he had heard about Sam Lord, so my great-great-great-grandfather. One was that he was a wrecker and a pirate, and the other was that he was a wife-beater. Well, he managed to disprove the theory of the wrecking and the piracy, but not the one about the wife-beater. So as I started to read the little bits that I could find about Lucy, I thought, this is a story that absolutely has to be told. She's an amazing woman. Look what she did. But very difficult to find the facts, because so much from that time, we're talking over 200 years ago, simply doesn't exist anymore.
I think it would be really helpful if you could give a synopsis of the book, because it would put things into perspective.
Yeah. Okay. Well, this is a story about a nice white bourgeois girl who was brought up on the Welsh-English border in a wealthy family. And then she basically kicks against the pricks. She's quite a feisty little madam through her childhood, and she has a runaway marriage to a planter from Barbados, and this is the early 1800s. So she goes out with him to Barbados, giving birth for the first time on board ship. And you have to bear in mind that this is during the Napoleonic Wars, so there was lots of piracy going on, and it was tough. And then she found herself in a trammeled but privileged life in a plantation house on Barbados, quite crowded with her husband's family and surrounded by enslaved workers. And gradually she finds out that her husband is not the gorgeous hunk that she thought he was. He was pretty good looking. And their relationship started to deteriorate with a great many fights. Which of course is when the domestic abuse started to kick in. But she refused. She would, every single time she was knocked down, and that, I mean literally physically as well as mentally, she always got up. And that was the thing that really struck me about Lucy, that she had so much courage. She showed so much resilience, as you've been talking about, and really showed leadership, because she's there. She's hundreds and hundreds of miles away from her family. She has absolutely nobody there really to support her. And she has to do it all herself. So how is she going to fight back? A lot of people would have just sort of lain down under that and not accepted anything, but she didn't. She got up and she decided to fight. And so, I'm not going to tell the whole story at all, but, this is a woman who, as I say, is out there with no family, and she has no rights at all. Her husband has all the rights over her. So she's a chattel, a thing in law.
In many ways, less value than one of the enslaved workers, hasn't she? Because her fortune has been taken over by her husband, and she has no rights over it at all.
No, she has no rights over it. And it's a difficult one, that, because, of course, enslaved people, their whole life has just gone, and they have no wealth. Yes, the ones who had a skill, they were more respected and were given a little bit more freedom. But to know that you're always going to be somebody's thing, at least,
Yeah.
I mean, women had a sort of a gloss, a kind of veneer of civilization around the way that they lived, but it was more or less a veneer. You're absolutely right, and that was really tough. And I thought it was really important for the younger generation in the family who hadn't really shown much interest in the family
Yeah.
history to know about this and to understand, where some of the strong characters in the family actually came from. So
Yeah.
that was what started me writing the book.
I didn't want for one moment to make light of being somebody who's been enslaved, but it just seems that in modern day, it's almost incomprehensible, isn't it? That because you've got married, that as you get married, so any rights that you have just disappear, and that your husband has effectively ownership over who you are and what you do.
It does, but then we hear all these stories all the time about people who are suffering domestic violence. And so often, I mean, I don't know what your reaction is, but very often I think, well, why doesn't she leave?
Well,
But
it's
that
an
takes
interesting.
huge courage.
It does. And I've worked with a number of people who have been abused. And the sort of comments that you get is, but at least I knew where I was. If I left, I have no financial freedom. They've very often got children. If I leave, how am I going to live? How will I feed my children? And so they get stuck in that sense that there is no other option. And once you believe you have no option, that becomes your reality, doesn't it?
Exactly.
It's not the reality,
no.
But ultimately stepping out of that place, even though it's so difficult, I'm going to say uncomfortable, but that doesn't do it justice. You are then really stuck in a place where you feel that there is nothing that you can do. And that was one of the things that struck me about Lucy, is time and time again, she's in a situation that, to be honest with you, most people would give up, that she finds a way through.
Yes,
that she's not going to allow it.
I think that's very true, because it was one of the things that really struck me as well, because not only is she in Barbados and without any real support, but she's not getting a huge amount of support from her mother either, who is very much of the view, well, our reputation, the family's reputation will be destroyed if you your husband, if you try to divorce, because it wasn't really acceptable in those days. No. And yet, and of course, she didn't have any money of her own, so it was very difficult for her. Despite the fact, I mean, it seems incredible, because she was back and forth between the UK and Barbados so many times by ship. It's quite incredible, it really is. But she didn't actually have any money really to do it. So she was dependent on finding ingenious ways to come back to what she considered her home outside Chepstow.
One of the other things that struck me is that, particularly when she first arrived in Barbados, that the one person that I got the sense that she had a connection with was actually her slave, who was her personal servant, and that felt there was a growing understanding on both sides that actually it was not one all having the privilege and the other all having the difficulty, but there was this meeting of two women in actually very difficult circumstances. And I'd be really interested in your take on that, because you're just getting my opinion from having read the book, whereas you have an intention around the writing of it.
Well, Francine, who was allocated to Lucy as her personal slave, is I hope she's an interesting character. She's the only major character who is not genuinely from history.
Right, that's
very difficult to find the detail around people who were enslaved, because of course it was no records were kept. And you're right, I wanted to try and create that link there. So it was important that Lucy felt mortified when she realized, for example, when she'd gone shopping, that she didn't bring anything back for Francine. She brought things back for other people, or the joy of Francine when she gave her the sketch that she had made of her, and then of course, you know, what happens later. No, I won't say what happens later, because people might actually read the book. But that, and all of those little things were gradually sort of developing a link. And of course, Francine was hugely important in terms of what happened to Lucy at the end, in helping her to escape from Barbados for the final time and return to England.
Now, we can't talk about this book in current times without talking about Black Lives Matter.
Absolutely.
And, you know, here we are in the 21st century, where we've still, and we've just had the football and all of the aftermath of racial intolerance and abuse. What's your take on this? And did it influence, well, I don't know that Black Lives Matter in terms of its movement, more recent movement, obviously haven't started when you first started the book. So, but what's your take on this whole thing?
Well, I think the racist abuse that has been going on is absolutely horrific. But what gave me real hope, and I think this is the first time we've really seen it, is if you look at the mural of Marcus Rashford and the defacing of that, and then you see the community response to that. Yeah. In other words, no, we're not going to accept it. We're going to drown out your racism. We're going to show that actually we are a community. That really gives me hope, and I think it is incredibly important. You're right, Black Lives Matter didn't exist when I first started to write the book, because it's taken me some years to do it. I was doing it part-time. But of course,
the issues are all there. It's just the movement.
Exactly. Yeah. And so I did, when I was rereading it for publication, I was looking at it in light of Black Lives Matter. And it was important to do that because, of course, language has moved on. And while you can use certain language in inverted commas because it's speech, it's dialogue of the era, I was very careful to make sure that I tried anyway, and I certainly hope I succeeded, to use correct language now, which would not upset people. Because I think this is a story because of what Francine does. I think it is a story also for people of colour to look at and actually be proud of some of the things that, you know, as they should be, of the history of their own peoples. And I'm absolutely delighted that one of the things that has happened because of Black Lives Matter is a focus on teaching Black and other ethnic minority history to children in schools. And we all ought to. I mean, I didn't learn any when I was at school. Did you? It was just not there.
It was mentioned, and you know, there was a discussion about slavery and how wrong it was. Mm-hmm. But I think it's very difficult to. I mean, that's no excuse. But it's very difficult to actually get a grasp of that when you're. I think I was in junior school, so you know, it's not until you become an adult and start to recognise how entrenched discrimination is. And in my own very, very, very tiny way, as a wheelchair user, I get, I have experienced challenges because people have made assumptions about my capacity.
Absolutely.
But when I look at how endemic it is, how people make assumptions about people simply because of how much melatonin there is in their skin, it just sickens me. One of my other guests was a lady called Deborah Thorne, who is an amazing Black woman. She calls herself the CEO, not the CEO. And she is just amazing. But we were talking about this in a discussion outside the show, and she was talking to me about things that have happened in her life that really made me sit up and think. You know, she said that she was in a lift not that long ago with her grandson, and there was a white woman in the lift, and as she got in there with her grandson, the white woman clutched her handbag to her chest. And the little lad was 11. And she said to the woman, you know, you have nothing to fear. And the woman said, oh, no, I don't know. She said, yes, you did. But I don't want my son to grow up feeling that he needs to be anything other than himself.
Yeah.
But at the same time, she has a son who's in his 30s, and she says every time he goes out, I worry, will he come back? Not because he's done anything, but because he may have been stopped and something may happen.
You're right, and I think there's a degree of discrimination across the piece. So, I mean, if you look at women, and white women, any coloured women, it doesn't really matter, but particularly white women, if you walked into a boardroom or you walked into a group normally of male bosses, naturally, you were expected to serve the tea. You were probably thought to be the tea lady, actually. Or certainly when I first started out, I can remember one of the outrageous excuses for not having women in the boardroom was that there weren't any ladies' toilets on the boardroom floor. I mean, crazy things like that.
Yeah.
And you mentioned about your disability, and I've recently I've just come off actually the Leonard Cheshire Disability Charities Board. So saw quite a lot of this and how people are really trying to open up and make people understand. And that's it. We've got to open people's eyes. Yeah. So when you were talking about Black history, and when we were talking about Black history just now, I think, we learned about the heroes of the Roman Empire from 2,000 years ago. Well, actually, it might have been more relevant if we'd heard about some of the heroes and the strong characters from from among the different Black denominations over the last 200, 300, 400, 500 years.
What you talked about having hope because of the outpouring of people's frustration and anger at that young Black footballers could be treated so badly. And I do believe that I hope we are at a watershed, that where what's going on with Black Lives Matters, with what's going on with the football, will actually make people who otherwise have walked around completely unconscious of the problem and made the assumption that there is no racism because they're not actively involved in it.
Or they don't see what they're doing as racist. It's unthinking racism.
And I think in many ways, it's the unthinking racism or discrimination to women or discrimination to disabled or whatever that actually is the more scary.
Yes.
Because when it's obvious and you can point it out and say that's wrong, then you've got half a chance of dealing with it. But when it is so buried into the culture, then it's very difficult. Awareness has to be the first step. And I think there should be nobody in the Western world who watches the news who's not aware now because there's been so much coverage. But of course, awareness in and of itself does nothing. We need action to be taken, and consistent action, rather than people just paying lip service to that action, don't we?
Yes, we do. And that's where I think Black Lives Matter can make a difference. You look at somebody like Lewis Hamilton and what he is doing in Formula One, but he's put his money where his mouth is. He's set up his commission, and he's actually starting to get some results. It will take time, but he's really focused on that. I think he's an amazing young man. I really do.
I do. And you look at Marcus Rushton, and I think it's terrible that he should need to fight for children to be fed. But I think it is amazing that he and other people are using their position to actually give the underprivileged a voice.
Yes.
And we need more of that. And so, I know you've done a lot of work in leadership, and that's my thing. That until we have leaders who model by example, who have a zero tolerance of discrimination of any sort, when we've got that, we've got leaders who lead with integrity, compassion, and the courage to do what's right.
But that comes back to the whole recruitment problem. So we've got, targets for having women and people of colour and people with disabilities on boards. But you can't have those unless you have a pipeline behind of executives.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And who chooses those executives? So you end up, because people do go, it's like to like. You can't help it. And there are ways around it. There are,
Yeah.
different forms of recruitment that you
Yeah.
can use, but it's very hard to start to develop that. So until that becomes much more the norm, and we start to see many more people of colour coming through at senior level, and then going on to the boards, many more women. We are beginning to see women, but it's not that brilliant. We still
No.
have to keep pushing. And people with disabilities, I mean, I think that's even further behind still at the moment, sadly.
Sadly. I think, though, the one thing that seems to be so important is that we each have to take radical responsibility for how we are showing up on a moment by moment basis. The words that we use, that, filtering our thoughts, and if we become aware that those thoughts actually come from a prejudiced place, to be open enough to think, actually, I need to rethink this. But I think the whole thing has to start with education in the home. Education, if you look at the life chances of people,
Yes,
they're not equal by any means, are they?
No.
1984 was a long time ago, but there are those that are equal and those that are more equal than others. It's still true, isn't it?
Yes, and if you look back at Lucy, you can see that women have come a long way since then, but also that there's still an awfully long way to go. So
Yes.
it is a problem. But one of the things I think that we can do, and it's each of us, so it's small steps, but is try and mentor somebody. If we've got our eyes open, I mean, you can use your experience with disability to help somebody else with a disability actually move up the ladder. We can all do a bit of that, and actually try and change attitudes as we go. It's slow, it's small, but that's the way you get there in the end.
And ultimately, all we can do is to take the next step and the next, and to not let things go. And I think, who was it that said the only thing that for evil to persist is for good men and women
to do nothing,
is to stay silent.
Absolutely.
So before we go, before your interview finishes, what would you like to say to anybody who is thinking of either buying a book for themselves or buying a book for somebody else? What is it about your book that you think is so important that they should read it?
I think for me, it's the fact that it is a true story, and that you can see just how strong women were, and in this case, Lucy, 200 years ago, and we can still learn from that. We can still learn from her experience, and I think it's just the colour in her life, in terms of the way that she lived her life, I think it provides a really good example for people today. If you've got young people who are thinking, well, how am I going to do things? How am I going to succeed if I've got all these problems? We've had lots of problems over the last year, and I think young people in particular have really suffered from that, and have felt really sort of beaten down. Well, okay, so you need to find that inner strength, which we all do have. It doesn't always exist because it gets beaten out of us, or because we're going through a really bad time. But we've all got some. So it's trying to find that spark of inner strength that helps you to get out of the position you're in. And Lucy had it in shovelfuls, and she really showed it. And I just think, by looking at a story that is about 200 years ago, you can actually get some kind of objectivity, and you can feel some emotion, but without actually getting so emotionally distraught and embroiled that you just can't take it any further. So I think that is a really important reason for reading the book.
Excellent. Now, you've got a great offer. Would you like to share your offer?
Yes. If a book club, I mean, I think this is a really good book for a book club, though some might think that it's quite long, so maybe longer than some of the ones they look at. But if a book club wants to get together and read the book, if you send me on one of my social media addresses a picture of all of you in the book club holding my book up, and that's the book. So if you show that to me and you want me to come and talk to you, I'll do a 60-minute online session with your book club on the book.
Fabulous. Thank you. It's been an absolute delight. And finally, before you go, those of you that watch the show regularly or listen to it will know that we are proud members of B1G1, Buy One, Give One. And so It's an organisation. There's sister charities. One raises all of the money for all of the administration, and the other, every penny that is donated goes towards projects which are around the world. I choose 3 every month, and I donate on behalf of my guests. And you have chosen to plant trees to increase forest cover, helping setting up plantations within village areas, in forests in I think it's the Amazon, to reforest places, because we desperately need that to happen. Once the plants are fully grown into trees, the locals are able to have the rights to use it for firewood and for fodder within the sustainable environment that's been created. So that will be donated on your behalf. For every 100 listeners, remember, we give free meals. So please not only listen live, but get people to download it. The more that listen, the more hungry people that we will feed. So it only remains for me to say a huge thank you, Elizabeth. It's been a great interview. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for inviting me on. I've really enjoyed it.
It's been brilliant. Don't go away. We've still a few minutes of the show. I'll see you after the break. Thanks, Elizabeth.
Thank you.
You have been listening to Gina Gardner on Leadership for Life. We'll be back after this quick break. Want to get the best out of life personally and professionally? Are you ready to step into a life which excites and fulfills you? Well, the right place for you is Leadership for Life with Gina Gardner on W4CY Radio and Talk4 TV. We will share with you stories from inspiring people, a wide range of guest experts, and lots of practical strategies to help you get the very best out of your personal and professional life. Leadership for Life is a radio and TV show focused on helping you live a happier, more successful, and fulfilling life. Join international best-selling author, motivational speaker, empowerment and transformational leadership coach and trainer, Gina Gardner, live every Thursday, 1 p.m. Eastern Time on W4CY Radio and Talk4 TV. Become the leader of your own life. Gina Gardner's #1 international best-selling book, Thriving Not Surviving, The 5 Secret Pathways to Happiness, Success, and Fulfillment, provides you with the foundational principles on which to become the best leader of your own life. It's available as an ebook, paperback, hardback, and as an audio from genuinely-u.com, or also from Amazon. Every one of the principles have been proven to work for the countless people who have used them, including the author. Now, let's put them to work for you. If you're ready to discover your true leadership life design, accelerate your journey with an invitation to join Gina for Leadership for Life VIP Day. Choose your journey of self-discovery where Gina will help you navigate your way to happiness, success, and fulfillment. To find out more, email gina@genuinely-u.com. Welcome back to Leadership for Life. Here is your host, Gina Gardner.
Hello there. I'd like to spend the last few minutes of this program talking to you about how you can develop greater resilience, confidence. Ultimately, there are many people who are really struggling with lack of confidence, with anxiety, with low mood, with feeling overwhelmed. And the trouble with that, as those people who suffer will tell you, is that everything then seems a struggle. And many people will look to anesthetize themselves with food or alcohol or drugs or shopping or sex or, something that just makes them feel nothing. I was talking to a client this morning, and it's taken us about 3 months, but we really are beginning to get on top of her drink problem. Now, not an alcoholic in the accepted sense, a binge drinker, somebody who's got a high profile job, who gets very, very stressed, and who was using alcohol, particularly at the weekend, to just allow her to unwind, to get over the sense of that she had, that somebody was going to find out that actually she was an imposter, that she wasn't as good as she thought she was, and to deal with the challenges in her, both her professional and her personal life. Now, professionally, she's doing pretty well, but her personal life was really challenging. And so what I want to do is I want to share just a few strategies that you can employ that cost you nothing, apart from a bit of time, but also to offer you a couple of products that may be of help. Is that okay? Now, two of the things that have really made a difference to all of my clients that I've worked with who have anxiety, lack of confidence, and so on, is working on your sense of self-worth, creating that relationship with yourself where you become your own best friend. Now, that might sound a bit ludicrous to you, but so many people treat everybody else well, but they don't treat themselves well. And if you don't believe in yourself, then how are you going to get anybody else to believe in you? So I want to share with you 3 exercises. The first exercise is to recognize that you are enough, okay? And one of the things that I do, and you can get these online or you can make your own, is to create posters that you, whether they're little post-its or big posters, mine are beautiful photographs with the words on, I am enough. And to put them in places around the house where you're going to see them. And as you do each time, with some real conviction and welly, to say, I am enough. I am enough. I am enough. And to recognize that in doing so, you start to recalibrate your brain so that your brain begins to see you in a very different light. Now, I had heard this on a course. I've adapted it, but I used it with a group of women in a wellness and confidence group, and I asked them to do it for a month. And at the end of the month, I got feedback such as, it's amazing. I feel so much more assertive. I've sorted my boss out. I've been able to be so much more. And that was consistently the message, different words, but the message the same, from every single lady that did it. Since then, I've used it with hundreds of people. If you want my photographs, you'll find them on genuinelyyou.com, genuinely-you.com, but you can make your own. And to start with this group, I just made a little signs out on A5 paper. But it's doing it consistently. The second thing is to collect gratitudes. Gratitude is such a powerful emotion and has the capacity, once again, to recalibrate the brain. The other thing about being grateful is that you have to be in the moment. So as you go through the day, collect gratitudes. For me, great plumbing, a lovely cup of tea, the natural world, my pet cat, are all things to be grateful for. When a friend phones, when somebody gives me a hug, a nice meal. And throughout the day, every day, really notice those things and feel grateful. And then just before you go to bed, scan the day and choose your top 3 or your top 5. And if you've got children, get them to do the same and make it part of their bedtime routine, because you can start to instill that confidence, that feeling that life is good with them. The third thing that I am suggesting that you do is to recognize that it's your choice whether to be happy. And if you're interested, there's a 7-day happiness challenge that you can go to on the website. There's also the personal empowerment plan, a 26-week program that you can do. It's very inexpensive, and that's designed particularly for anxiety and for lack of confidence. Thanks so much for joining me today. Do go and buy the book, Lucy. It really is a good read. And join me next week. Get people to download it so we can give lots of free meals. Take care and become the leader of your own life.
You have been listening to The Leadership for Life with your host, Gina Gardner. Make sure you tune in to W4CY Radio and Talk 4 TV next Thursday and every Thursday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time for more Leadership for Life. If you missed any part of this episode or just want to hear or see it again, you can find the archive of the TV show on Talk 4 TV's YouTube channel and the podcast of The Leadership for Life on iHeartRadio, Pandora, Spotify, Amazon Music, and wherever you listen to your podcast.